thoroughly enjoying fall weather, this Jeep with the top off, and I can't imagine taking it apart quite yet. So I'm going to start working on some of the major components. I've went ahead and sourced a transmission from Craigslist, and I've got an engine. We're going to actually jump in the shop right now and start working on the transmission. We're going to tear it down. We'll look at what's wrong with it. We'll rebuild it, and then put it all back together and get that thing ready to be put in the Jeep when the time comes. So let's head back to the shop and get started on that transmission. Okay, I'm going to rebuild this AX15. It's out of a 1998 TJ Wrangler. It had 180,000 miles on it. Bought it on Craigslist. Paid $160 for it. And the guy dropped it because he messed up the reverse gear. He actually did open it up and took some pictures. He's very open with what was wrong with it. And it was exactly what I was looking for. Something to purchase, and then I'm going to rebuild it. I've gone ahead and bought the master rebuild kit, as well as the reverse idler gear, which I know is broken, and I went ahead and bought the fifth. There's an upgrade to the fifth gear, so we're going to imply that as well. So before we crack this open, let me show you some of the documentation I'm going to be following. It's the repair manual, as well as some diagrams and some other research that I've done, and let's go over that. I found this nice exploded diagram of the transmission, so I'm going to have that on my wall, so I've got good reference to that, as well as I've replicated. Here's a normal size version of it, but it's got part numbers, and I got part descriptions and prices in case I need to, as I tear this apart, find things that are wrong. We'll be able to figure out how we're going to need to replace that, as well as, here's the main thing, is this is the service manual, and the service manual goes step by step how to do this. I've read through this several times. I've got some recommendations. I know we're not supposed to use Geo gear lube anymore. It hurts the yellow metals, specifically the synchronizers, so we're going to use something different. But interestingly, there's actually some things that are incorrect in here, so I'll kind of go over those as I hit them. But this reminds me, there's going to be three things that I'm most worried about when I'm doing this, and that is there's detent balls that will just fall out of nowhere. So you got to kind of expect where they are and how to deal with those as they show up. So I've got those highlighted in yellow. The other thing is just what order in which things go, and that's really important of videotaping. I recommend videotaping anything you do. That way you've got a good record of how it came apart. The other thing I've got is I've actually got two shops in my local area that do specialize in rebuilding these transmissions. So if I get into trouble, I'll be able to get their help in assisting with anything I need. So anyway, let's get started. We're going to follow this step by step and start taking it apart. Alright, first we're going to take off this lock ball plug. Spring. Alright, so after further investigation, it doesn't appear the lock ball is in there, so I'm going to order that and or keep investigating, make sure it's not up in there, but I've looked with a flashlight. So now we're going to take off the adapter housing bolts. I'll look at these, make sure none of them are of a different size. So that one came out of the top. Take them out. Yep, that one's longer. so just these two here were longer. We'll make a note of that. Ball we're looking for. Alright, next I'm going to take off this front bearing retainer. Now this snap ring. Okay, I'm going to put these in a special place to mark them, so make sure I get the right size back on here from the rebuild kit. I'm just going to hang them in this spot. I'm going to take this off in case it's binding on something. Pretty loose. This is the reverse switch. Can you help me hold? Alright, let's look at the actual problem of this original. Was this reverse idler gear? Yeah, you can see where the teeth are gone. And my big concern is what that marries up to, make sure those teeth are okay. And it's this, here's the mating gear, and it's got enough issues that I'm going to have to order that too. Alright, next I got to take off these 3 Detent cap covers. There's going to be a spring and balls under here, so we've got to be careful with the balls. We'll probably have to use a magnet to get those out. So let's get these broken loose. These are pretty rusted looking, so this may be kind of a little bit difficult. Yeah. I'm going to sit them on the bench in order, then I'm going to look at them. I believe they're all the same. There's 3, 2, 1. Using a bolt to extend it because it's narrower, but it'll still go in and grab the balls. There's 1. There's 3. And there's 2. So since those are all the same. Okay, so I've mounted this in a vise, and they say to put a bolt in there where it doesn't touch whatever. I don't have the bolts, whatever, so I took a paint stick and lined my vise with paint stick, and I'm actually going to get, I think, a better grip, and I'm definitely not marring up or damaging this surface. So I'm very happy with it being very stable and not doing any damage. So, all right, next we're going here is 5th gear. We're going to take off. There's a C clip right here. We're going to take off. Okay, got the C-clip off. Okay, so back on the gear side, we're going to take off this little spring clip. It's an E-clip. Clip there. Okay, and now we need to take off these 2 bolts for this reverse shift arm. Remove the shift arm and shoe. Okay, so that just pulled off. All that looks pretty good. Okay, so next I'm going to take off, this is the 5th gear shift fork. Should be able to pull this out enough to get this fork off. Alright, so I'm going to mark this as 5th, and I'm going to put an arrow to the front of the transmission. Front of the transmission is that way. Okay, so now I'm going to take off this reverse shift head and shift rail. There's a ball between these 2 shift rails, and it locks these 2 together. Okay, hold the fort. Let me explain what just did happen and what should have happened. A minute ago, we removed the 5th shift fork by pulling the 5th shift rail, pulling it out a little bit, and then we removed this piece. The second part of the sentence, which I did not read, said the next piece was actually to pull this shift rail out, completely out. And I didn't do that. If I'd have done that, this ball would have dropped out. It's this ball that we're having a problem with. So in normal circumstances, the ball wouldn't be there, and this shift, reverse shift head rail that we're trying to pull out now, that would just slide right out without any problem. So that's why I'm having the problem explained there. But while we're here, this is really cool stuff. This is kind of the inspiration why I wanted to rebuild the transmissions, to learn how this stuff worked. We always hear about detents, and you know, detent is means detain or to hold or control. And the detent system, this whole section right here in gray, this is our intermediate plate, and in there there's basically a channel. It's got a bunch of balls, pins, and plugs that help maintain and track which gear you're in, and they basically allow you to shift into one gear, and once it's shifted into gear, it locks everything back up, so these rails cannot move left or right, so another gear cannot engage. If we look at the top, here's one of those caps we removed. This would represent the spring, and here's a ball. So this is a spring-loaded ball. This is the 3rd, 4th shift rail, and it attaches to the 3rd, 4th shift fork. 3rd gear being on this side, 4th gear being on this side. If this rail moved to the left, we'd be engaging 4th gear, and this ball would drop down in that little trough, and that trough, that spring-loaded ball in that trough, would help keep the transmission in 4th gear so it wouldn't bounce back out. When you do that, when you shift this, right now these shift rails are all in like a neutral position. The transmission is like in neutral. And so any one of these 4 rails can move left or right. Once you shift one of these rails, any one of these rails shifts left or right, these pins and plugs shift up or down accordingly, and they lock the remaining 3 rails so they cannot accidentally shift into a gear. In the intermediate plate, it's a bigger piece because they can drill a pretty big hole in here, and it's called a plug. In any of the shift rails themselves, they use a smaller hole and what they call a pin for that. But these all basically touch each other and shift up and down to help control or detent these rails from making anything go into multiple gears. Down here at the bottom, we also got a ball, a spring, and a cap. And it'll drop. There's a trough right there, so this would hold it, pushing it this way. That holds it in reverse, or it might be holding it into 5th. This is the 5th reverse shift rail. So anyway, this stuff fascinates me, and this is why I really do all this stuff. So I thought I would share that with you. So let's get back to the teardown, and hopefully this explanation will help you understand what we're about to do. Okay, so now I'm going to take off this reverse shift head and shift rail. There's a ball between these 2 shift rails, and it locks these 2 together. There's a little relief in this shift rail right here. I'm going to let the ball drop down into that, which will pull it away from this, allowing me to pull this piece off. So I pull this in. I heard the ball drop. Now if I hold that still, get it just right. Let me find that hole again right there. Put it there. There we go. Now it'll come out. Now this ball is sitting in that groove. If I rotate that off, there's our first ball. But we knew it was there because of the instructions. So I'm going to put these 2 pieces together over here. Okay, next we need to do a measurement. Before we start taking it apart, we're going to measure the clearance between the 5th counter gear and the thrush washer, which is on this inside. And if you move this back and forth, you can identify where the 5th gear ends. And we'll look at that. We'll see that thrust washer here in a minute when we start taking it apart. But it's basically a gap that's right in here, if you can see the end of that pointer. And it needs to be between 3 thousandths and 19 thousandths. And I went ahead and kind of messed with it, and I've got it where 13 thousandths will not fit in there and 12 will, so mine's at 12 thousandths, which is perfectly in spec. So we're okay with the shims and everything that's involved with that. So now we're ready to take that apart. So my 6-inch 3-jaw puller was too big to get behind these gears, so it just didn't align right. So instead of that, I'm going to use a harmonic balancing puller. Okay, as I take this apart, orientation's pretty key. The diagram does a great job of showing which way these things go back together, but there's a 5th spline gear, the 5th synchro ring. That still has a little bit of break to it, so that's okay. Obviously it's going to be replaced. As I pull all this stuff off, I'm going to set it on the table face up, goes on the shaft first. So this will be sitting on over here, that way. Got a bearing inside here, synchro hub, and the counter gear. Again, I'm going to set this face this direction. And then here's the... Okay, so this is that thrush sleeve. This is the one that we were measuring the gap between this and that counter shaft. And then there's a ball right there. We need to get that ball. So set this over here. That ball is going to go over here. Next, I need to take off this bearing retainer. Now you'll see right here, there's this plate actually locks into this shaft here. We'll have to make sure when we put this shaft back in that this plate gets back into that sleeve at that point right there. Okay, and with that removed, now I can remove this shaft and this counter gear. That's the gear that actually messed up, and that's the main reason we're rebuilding the transmission, plus 180,000 miles. Alright, so the next part is going to be taking out the shift rails and the shift forks, and one of the most important part here, again on the caution side, is all the balls and plugs and pins that are in this section that basically manage these right here at this intermediate plate. There's a cap here we're going to remove. It's got a spring and a ball. And then there's pins and plugs that go between all these on this side here. And so as we remove these things, we need to make sure we're doing that slowly and removing those balls and marking which position they came in. They're all different sizes. Okay, so this is that plug. Instructions don't mention this, but I saw this in a video. We need to get this out. We're going to pull a spring and a ball out that's at the top of this channel part. So let's get that guy out. Spring. Ball. Okay, so we got our first little snag. I got the cap off, the spring off, the ball bearing is still down there. Can't get it out. I even turned this thing upside down. It wouldn't fall. That's okay because that bearing sits right on top of this shaft. And it'll actually fall out here, and as I pull the shaft out, I put my fingers here and make sure it doesn't fall on the floor and lose it, that type of thing. Not worry about that. Here's the issue. The next thing, I've got this, the pins out of the shift forks, so this rail should now slide out. It's the next thing I need to take out, but it won't slide out because it's locked by these locking pins and bars. They go through here, and so like this one's locked, this one's locked, this one's locked, but see how this one's not locked? Because this one is in a position, it's got all those pins pushing up and got all the rest of these locks, so they won't allow this transmission to go into multiple gears. So what I've got to do is take this little slot, match it up with where I think that ball is, allow all these balls shift down, and that'll free up this one. And sometimes I think I can hear it drop. Oh, just heard it dropped, I think. There. Okay, so now this came out because all these little pins shifted down, fell down into that little groove of this thing. Now they shifted down. Now this will slide out, and then I'm gonna be real careful and put my fingers on either end, so that ball that's sitting on top drops out, and I'll be able to capture it. So let's actually do that real quick. Okay, I'm gonna put my finger on the back side of this as this rail finishes up. Okay, it didn't fall. Right in the top is that ball. That ball is sitting on top of that rail right up in here. Now there's going to be one plug going between these that I got to capture. Let me get this plug out. Let's go from this side. Here's a plug. So that plug goes between the third, fourth shift rail and the first and second shift rail. So I'm gonna put that in my parts bin, and I'm actually gonna write and label it, because I think the other plug that's down in here, maybe a couple more plugs, might be a little different size. So I'm gonna get that labeled and put in a box. Okay, so now I'm actually noticing where when we removed the fifth shift fork in that procedure, there was a buried in us one sentence, we removed this piece. They also wanted us to remove this shift rail. So that last problem wouldn't have happened if I had this out, because it would have been dropped down. So I'm going to slide this out now and capture that if I can. There we go. Okay. You just got to work that stuff around to get that I'm going to rotate that so it'll slide out. I'll put my finger over this hole to capture that. And I'm on this back side, I'm going to capture that ball. Alright. So there's the ball for the fifth and reverse shift rail. I'll get that labeled. Okay, now, so we got the plug above this rail's out, so we now have to slide this out. Oop, a pin just fell out. Okay, so where's that? The pin that goes in that little slot right there is here. So I'm going to put that in my box, and I'm going to label that as 1-2 shift rail pin. Alright, there should be another plug. See if I can get it out from this side. Yep. Alright, so here's a plug that sits on top of this rail. It's actually below 1 and 2. This rail actually doesn't. This is the reverse shift rail. So it sits on top of between 1 and 2 in the reverse shift rail. I'll get that labeled. The plug's out, so now this is ready to remove. We've got to remove it this direction because it's got a lever arm on it. Oop, we got a pin on it too. Okay. Now this is going to have a pin inside it. And it dropped to right there. There's a little pin. Okay, now we take these shift forks off. Got them labeled as 1, 2, and then 4 to the transmission. There's that one. And number 3, 3, 4. I just want to make sure I don't try and put it in backwards. Now we're ready to take these two assemblies out. There's some snap rings on this side that we gotta loosen up or take off, and then that should come out as an assembly, and we'll have a bare intermediate plate. Okay, this gap's a little bit tighter than my pliers would allow, so I just gotta use some screwdrivers. Okay, now that the teardown is complete, it's time to do kind of an inspection. I'll start over here. This is the cluster gear. All these gears are actually machined onto this one shaft. I've inspected each of the gears and the teeth, and everything looks perfect on this. Even the bearing is super smooth, although my kit came with a new bearing, so we're obviously going to replace that. But so I'm going to set this aside because this we're going to need this whole area for assembly. Here is now this is the input shaft and the output shaft, and all the gearings. Here's first, reverse, second, third, and fourth. This bearing comes in the kit, as well as the other bearing that's the other end of the input, the cluster shaft. That's going to come in the kit too. I'll show you the kit in just a second. But you know, we got to inspect all these gears. Everything looks fine except for that reverse gear that we saw. It's just got, you feel it across here. There's enough notches on here. I'm not gonna. In fact, there's actually some. It's gouged down some, so that's got to be replaced. That's the reverse gear, and it's also the first and second little shift clutch component. So I'll need to. I don't have that ordered. I'm going to have to order that. And I think ultimately, because I'm going to do that, I'm not going to take this apart yet. There's some bearing. These bearings got to be pressed off and on. Instead of doing that and getting this halfway taken apart, I want to get that other piece in so I can take it apart and freshly put it back together before I forget. So now let me actually show you the replacement parts that I do have. Okay, this is the AX15 Transmission Deluxe Rebuild Kit. It's got all those major bearings that are on all the ends of the shafts, the cluster shaft and the input-output shaft, as well as all the bearings needed for each of the different gears, springs, and the little clips that go in for the synchro hubs. All new seals, spring-loaded, little spring in there, and then here's all the synchro rings. Came with 5. I won't use one of these only because the new 5th gear that I bought came with its own. So I'm going to keep that all matched together. Let me let you look at that. Actually, let me just, I think right up here. This is the new reverse idler gear, X1510 idler gear. Got a part number there and all. So that'll replace, I knew that piece was bad, so I knew I needed to have that. I went and bought that early. And then this is a 5th gear upgrade. I'm not sure, I could not find exactly what was wrong, but they were saying that if you're doing your 5th gear, you might as well have this. I went ahead and bought it. This is before I ever obviously opened the case, but it actually comes with this hub as well too, and it came with its own specialized synchronizing ring. So I'm going to use this one versus the one that came in the other kit. Keep that all together. So I do need to buy one more part. I'll buy that reverse gear, and once that comes in, we're going to get all this assembled. And a final note on organization. I bought this little cubby cube thing and basically started putting things in this box as I took them out. Added some labels where I needed labels, but I basically started at that top corner. As we went through the instructions, I went just, you know, chronologically through this bin, putting the parts on. When I needed to, I put little notes in there so I know what step they belong to. So reinstallation, I'll just go backwards through the little box. Between that and over here, I've got the shift forks, and the arrow points to the front of the transmission, so I know which direction those go in. A lot of them are okay, except for like this one here doesn't have any thing on it, so it can only go one way. But that's how I kind of organize things. And again, when I start pulling these gears off, there's going to be a method to my madness on keeping those in line and all the parts. Plus, I've got that exploded diagram. That's really going to help. I looked at it really detailed, and it does show direction and stuff like that. But I'm still going to be very cognizant of that stuff. The worst thing, put something on backwards and it not rotate.
Jack it up.